Have you ever imagined how a single act of compassion could spark a monumental adventure? In this tale, our determined Terran diplomat offers his last piece of chocolate to a mysterious woman he assumes is destitute. Little does he know she's an alien princess, setting in motion an extraordinary journey across scorching deserts and through intricate royal rituals. The best part? Each challenge only deepens their bond, carrying them into the heart of galactic politics and unforeseen dangers, all for the sake of unity and love. Curious to find out how this humble gesture changes both their lives forever? Stick around to experience the twists, trials, and triumphs that follow. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any of the thrilling stories we share. Your support helps us continue bringing you immersive tales from across the galaxy and beyond. If you're ready for a deeply moving, interstellar adventure, let's dive right in. Roland Hayes trudged through the winding, sun-scorched avenues of Beryl Spire City, cursing the oppressive heat that pounded down on him from the twin suns of Vanleth Prime. He had arrived here under the banner of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, assigned to negotiate new trade routes for Earth. Nothing could have prepared him for the city's architecture, a striking blend of ancient Earth Middle Eastern motifs in alien bioorganic design. Buildings flowed in sinuous curves, their surfaces composed of pale, sand-hued materials that seemed to sprout from the very ground rather than having been constructed by hands. Towering spires glistened under the unrelenting sunlight, their exteriors dotted with crystalline growths that refracted light into rainbow shards dancing across the dusty air. Though he wore a sophisticated environment-regulating suit, standard issue for Terran ambassadors on desert worlds, Roland felt every bit of the scorching temperature pressing in on him. Sweating and short of breath, he muttered under his breath about how negotiations with the local trade council had dragged on longer than anticipated, and now he found himself walking back to his temporary residence during the worst hours of the day. Most inhabitants knew better than to venture outdoors in the midday blaze, so the streets were eerily vacant, amplifying the sense of quiet desolation. As he turned a corner near a massive administrative building, he spotted a figure crouched in the sparse shade it provided. The figure, slight and trembling, was vaguely humanoid. Intrigued and concerned, Roland approached cautiously, uncertain if the individual posed a threat or needed assistance. The figure turned out to be a woman. At least that was his best assumption, based on her delicate features and subtle feminine cues in her attire. Her skin possessed a faint, otherworldly blue hue, a luminosity that only heightened its exotic quality under the golden glare of Vanleth Prime's suns. Silvery hair fell over her face in messy tangles, and her clothes were ragged and dirty, bearing signs of heavy wear. He guessed she might be a local, possibly down on her luck. Kneeling, Roland spoke softly, though the dryness in his throat caused his voice to crack. Her eyes flicked up, and he caught a glimpse of something extraordinary, like quicksilver or molten mercury shifting within her irises, reflecting both curiosity and a deep-seated pride. Despite her obviously dire condition, there was a dignity in her posture that took him by surprise. He wondered what circumstances had led her to this patch of shade, alone and vulnerable, while the rest of the city hid indoors. A part of him hesitated. He had been warned that Vanleth Prime could be dangerous for the uninitiated, that deceptions lurked in every shadow. Yet he was not the sort to turn away from someone in distress. Pressing his lips together in thought, Roland rummaged through his pockets. He had one final ration bar left, an ultra-compact chocolate-based sustenance known as a Vita cacao bar, which provided enough energy for an entire day in harsh conditions. They were expensive and difficult to acquire, especially here, and it was literally his last one until he could restock. Still, the memory of Earth's many philanthropic traditions tugged at his conscience. Could he really walk away while someone suffered? He held the bar out. "Here," he said, his tone gentler than usual. "It's not much, but it'll help." The woman raised her eyes again. In that moment, Roland thought he saw a flicker of astonishment in those mercury-like irises. She studied the ration bar as if expecting it to dissolve or attack her at any moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and resonant, carrying an unplaceable melodic undertone. "No one here just gives away food," she said, "especially not the foreigners." Roland shrugged, managing a small smile. "Humans know hardship. We also believe in helping where we can." Please take it. He placed the bar beside her on the ground, not wanting to force it into her hands, and got to his feet. As he walked away, he could still feel her gaze burning into his back. He did not see the guarded, almost calculating expression she wore once he was out of earshot, nor did he see how she carefully tucked the ration bar into an inner pocket of her tattered clothing. Negotiations with the local merchant guild had been tense, but Roland was making progress. Von Leth Prime was a vital hub for interstellar commerce due to its strategic position in warp lane intersections. Earth's Terran diplomatic corps saw great potential here for trade agreements and technology exchanges. Roland had been sent as part of a small team, but he alone was tasked with bridging cultural gaps, smoothing out conflicts, and laying the groundwork for an alliance. Still, the dryness and heat of the planet tested his endurance. It was a relief then when he received an unexpected summons to a formal reception at the Emperor's Palace, an opulent structure said to be the centerpiece of Beryl Spire City. Curiosity spiked as soon as he crossed the palace's threshold. The interior design was even more fantastical than the architecture he had glimpsed outside. Tall arches, seemingly grown from livingstone, vaulted overhead, giving the grand corridors a natural organic feel. Bioluminescent veins snaked along the walls, pulsating with soft light that ebbed and flowed in time to the environment's unseen rhythm. He felt as though he were walking inside a colossal, breathing organism. The palace halls led to an enormous reception room glittering with alien crystals embedded in polished floors. Antiquities from numerous worlds lined the walls, displayed in transparent containers. Roland, dressed in his formal ambassadorial attire, dark tunic, ceremonial sash, and Terran insignia, did his best not to gawk. Emperor Orlanahan, the absolute monarch of Vaon Leth Prime, waited on a raised dais at the far end of the hall. Clad in regal attire composed of flowing fabrics and shimmering ornaments, Orlan appeared every bit the ruler. Tall and commanding, with the same pale blue skin as many natives, he exuded an aura of power and gravitas. Courtiers and attendants flanked him, all clad in elaborate garments that combined threads of luminous fiber with soft draping materials. Roland approached, performing the respectful bow he had practiced so many times with his protocol advisor. "Welcome, Ambassador Hayes of Earth," Emperor Orlan said, his voice reverberating across the vaulted hall with an impressive timbre. "I trust you find our city hospitable." It was not exactly a question Roland was about to reply when his gaze was drawn to a figure standing slightly behind the Emperor, an arresting woman with silvery hair and unmistakable mercury-like eyes. A jolt of recognition shot through him. She was the same woman he had given his last Vitakakao bar to just days earlier. Gone were the ragged clothes and the dusty hair. Now she was adorned in a sumptuous gown that reflected starlight glimmers with each subtle movement. A stately air clung to her, as did a sense of quiet confidence. His mind reeled at the stark contrast. "Allow me to present my daughter, Princess Althea," Emperor Orlan said, a note of amusement curling his lips. "I believe the two of you have met." Struggling to maintain composure, Roland bowed again, more deeply this time. "Your Highness," he said, his voice catching slightly. Princess Althea stepped forward, her eyes glittering with mischief and curiosity. "Ambassador Hayes," she responded smoothly, "I thank you for your generosity. Your last nutrient bar, I believe." Roland's cheeks heated as he recalled the moment in the street. He had assumed she was impoverished, and now he realized she was royalty. What a diplomatic blunder. Yet somehow she did not appear offended. Instead, her expression bordered on playful, as if she found the whole situation delightfully entertaining. Emperor Orlan too wore a slight smirk, as if enjoying Roland's surprise. Before Roland could piece together a coherent apology, the Emperor waved a hand toward a set of doors leading to a lavish dining hall. "Come, Ambassador," Orlan said. "We will discuss your trade proposals over dinner. My daughter has expressed a keen interest in Terran customs." Althea inclined her head politely, gesturing for Roland to accompany her. Together they followed the Emperor and a gaggle of advisors, each step echoing in the shimmering halls. Roland's pulse thrummed in his ears. Was this all an elaborate test? Or had he truly stumbled into the good graces of the ruling family by virtue of a small act of kindness? One thing was certain. His diplomatic mission had just become far more complex and potentially more rewarding than he had ever anticipated. That evening, the emperor's palace hosted a state banquet unlike anything Roland had ever witnessed. Long tables arranged in concentric circles filled an expansive hall. Overhead, bioluminescent chandeliers hung like clusters of living fireflies, casting dancing shadows on the mosaic floors. Musicians played instruments that emitted tones reminiscent of singing glass, filling the air with haunting melodies that slid up and down alien scales. The entire atmosphere felt surreal, but Roland knew he had to keep his wits about him. The emperor sat at the center table, flanked by his highest advisors, and Princess Althea took a seat directly across from Roland. The courses served were a marvel of local and interstellar cuisine: roasted desert fauna in aromatic sauces, crystalline fruits that glistened like gemstones, and spiced grains that produced flavors reminiscent of distant Earth cultures. Althea herself sampled only small bites, more interested, it seemed, in watching Roland's reactions. "Do you always offer strangers your last ration bar?" she asked at one point, her soft voice cutting through the general murmur of conversation. Roland sensed that the question was more than mere curiosity. It was an inquiry into human nature. He set his fork down and considered his words carefully. "Not always," he admitted, "but in that moment, you seemed to need it more than I did. On Earth, we don't always make a habit of such gestures, but we do value compassion and generosity. At least we strive to." A faint smile touched the princess's lips. "Compassion," she echoed, as if tasting the word. "It's so straightforward, yet so complicated. Here we're taught that alliances and favors come with calculated costs. Very little happens without intent." She let her gaze linger on him. Roland couldn't decipher whether she found his gesture naive or admirable, or perhaps both. Emperor Orlan, seeming to sense the direction of their conversation, interjected. "Ambassador Hayes, your trade discussions with the Merchant Guild have been fruitful, but certain decisions lie beyond their purview. I think it is best we deal directly with each other in the spirit of forging something deeper than a mere commercial contract." Roland nodded appreciatively, though a flutter of nerves danced in his stomach. A direct audience with the Emperor meant the stakes were higher. Still, this was what he was here to accomplish: a solid, beneficial alliance between Earth and Vanleth Prime. As the evening progressed, Althea and Roland continued their subtle tete-a-tete. She asked him about Earth's history, its vast cultures, and how humans adapted to so many different environments. In turn, he asked her about Vanleth Prime's traditions. He learned that the twin suns were believed to be celestial siblings, their synergy a symbol of unity across the planet's diverse peoples. 1,000 cultural nuances surfaced in her explanations, from the significance of the color silver in royal attire to the intricate social hierarchies that governed everything from marriage to military rank. All the while, the Emperor watched them, occasionally exchanging sidelong glances with his advisors, who seemed intrigued and possibly concerned by the princess's evident fascination with the Terran ambassador. Later, a hush descended upon the banquet hall as dessert was served. Delicacies in tinted crystal bowls revealed themselves under a shimmering dome, sweets that exuded the fragrance of honey and stardust, sprinkled with powders that caught the light in tiny prismatic bursts. Althea sampled them with measured elegance, but her eyes never left Roland. "Tell me, Ambassador, or," she said quietly, "did you try the bar you gave me?" Roland managed a rueful grin. "I was down to my last one, so I already knew exactly how it tasted. I take it you found it acceptable." Her lips curled into an enigmatic smile. "It was very rich, different from anything I've tasted it before. Perhaps a perfect metaphor for you humans. Unexpected, yet surprisingly satisfying." The double meaning behind her words did not escape him, and his pulse quickened. At the conclusion of the meal, Emperor Orlan rose and thanked everyone for attending, making particular note of Earth's contributions to the potential alliance. Althea swept forward, her gown trailing like a ripple of starlight on water. She reached Roland's side and leaned in just close enough so that only he would hear. "Our conversations are not over, Ambassador," she murmured. Then she departed after her father, leaving Roland in a whirl of questions. He realized this was not mere diplomatic courtesy. Something deeper was unfolding, and he had to be cautious, but also honest. A fateful chord had been struck between him and the princess, and neither of them seemed inclined to ignore it. Over the next few days, the negotiations intensified. Roland found himself more often in Emperor Orlon's Grand Council chamber, where political and commercial leaders debated terms of trade with Earth. The tensions ranged from tariffs on advanced Terran tech to the scope of agricultural exports. Whenever Althea attended, seated quietly on a side bench, Roland felt her eyes follow him, as if she were dissecting his every word. At times, the formality of it all weighed on him, but his sense of purpose remained clear. Earth needed a secure foothold in this region of space, and Van Leth Prime stood at the crossroads of vital shipping routes. Yet political intricacies were not the only complexities swirling about him. Princess Althea was an enigma. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling round of negotiations, Roland returned to his assigned suite to find a sealed message awaiting him. The script on the outside was fluid and artistic, decidedly different from Terran script. Inside, the note read, "Meet me in the Northern Solarium at moonrise." It was signed simply, A. Although no explicit mention was made, Roland had no doubt it was from Althea. Part of him hesitated. Would this be appropriate? Another part of him felt drawn, almost magnetically. He slipped away from his usual entourage of aides and advisors that evening. Though staff security was tight, the palace was sprawling, and it wasn't difficult for someone with ambassadorial credentials to find his way around. He discovered the Northern Solarium perched on a high terrace, a wide, open space with walls made of transparent crystal, offering a breathtaking view of the desert dunes beyond the city. Moonlight from one of Van Leth Prime's 3 natural satellites poured through in soft, silvery blue rays. Althea stood near the window, her silhouette outlined by the glow. She wore simpler garments this time, a sleek silver robe that complemented her ethereal complexion. The hush of the solarium was palpable, broken only by the distant hum of wind skirting the palace walls. Althea beckoned him closer, and Roland obliged, feeling an inexplicable tension coil in the air. "Ambassador," she greeted him softly, "you've been busy winning over our council." He inclined his head. "I'm trying my best. Earth has much to gain here, but we also have much to offer." Althea studied him for a moment. "Your diplomacy is admirable, but I suspect it's not the only reason you came." Her directness gave him pause. She continued, "Your generosity that day in the street, your willingness to stand by your beliefs even in a place that might exploit them, these qualities are not common here. We are more accustomed to cunning calculations, debts owed, and power plays." Roland swallowed, searching for a response. "We have those on Earth too, but I've learned that sometimes the simplest gestures, like sharing what you have, can be the most important." Althea's gaze dropped briefly to her hands, where she toyed with a small, empty ration wrapper. The sight made Roland's heart skip. It was the Vaitaka cow wrapper he had given her. "I kept it," she explained, her tone almost self-conscious. "I don't know why. It's just a scrap of material, but it feels significant, like a symbol of something bigger than either of us could have anticipated." Moving closer to the windows, they gazed out at the dunes, shimmering under moonlight. The hush made every breath audible. Then Althea pivoted to face him, the reflection of the city lights dancing in her luminous eyes. "You must think me deceitful for letting you believe I was poor," she said quietly. "But I wasn't trying to trick you. I needed a glimpse of who you truly are, without the pretense of royalty clouding our interaction." Roland shook his head, stepping nearer. "No apology needed. If anything, I appreciate the honesty now." A fragile moment passed between them as the desert breeze stirred the solarium's warm air. "Althea," he began tentatively, "this connection, I'm not sure where it leads. I came here expecting only trade deals, not—" He trailed off. She reached out, her slender fingers brushing his. Her touch felt electric against his skin, sending a jolt of awareness up his arm. "Neither did I," she confessed, "but I'm not one to ignore destiny when it appears. We stand at the threshold of something, perhaps bridging worlds in more ways than one." Roland felt the hammer of his heartbeat as their hands remained gently entwined. If an onlooker stepped in, it would have been scandalous. But in that moment, it was merely them and the hush of starlit silence. Unbeknownst to Roland, palace chatter spread swiftly. Rumors of a Terran ambassador sharing clandestine moments with the princess. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled fans. High-ranking officials eyed him with suspicion or curiosity. A swirl of political ramifications loomed, one that might jeopardize the budding trade agreement or, conversely, cement a powerful alliance. Through discreet channels, Roland's Terran colleagues urged him to tread carefully. Remember your mission, they warned. Personal entanglements can be dangerous. But the heart rarely yields to caution, especially when drawn into an unfamiliar yet intoxicating bond. Amid this swirling uncertainty, Emperor Orlan announced a grand festival in honor of the prospective Earth-Vainleth Prime Alliance. Hundreds gathered in the great courtyard of the palace, where dancers moved in flowing synchronicity to the haunting melodies performed by the royal orchestra. Stalls lined the courtyard perimeter, offering glimpses of Vainleth's finest crafts, glittering textiles, intricately carved stone figurines, and alien instruments that produced resonant, otherworldly tunes. Roland navigated the throng accompanied by a pair of Terran aides in a small security detail assigned by the palace. As he observed the festivities, he felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. Turning, he found Althea standing there, radiant in a gown that caught and refracted moonlight in shimmering patterns. She held out a hand, her expression serene yet tinged with excitement. "Dance with me?" she asked. A swirl of emotion stirred in Roland's chest. He could almost feel the startled gazes of onlookers from across the courtyard. Even his Terran aides exchanged uneasy glances. Nonetheless, he took Althea's hand. Their dance began hesitantly. Roland was no master of Vainlethian steps, but Althea guided him, pressing closer so he could mirror her movements. The music's rhythms, infused with intervals foreign to human ears, challenged him at first. But soon an instinctive synergy emerged between them, her subtle gestures guiding him into a swirl here, a dip there. The crowd's whispering grew louder, but the princess seemed oblivious, her mercury eyes focused solely on him. In that moment, Roland realized how powerful symbols could be. A human from Earth, an alien princess from Vainleth, dancing in front of their peoples. When the music slowed to a close, the courtyard erupted in applause. Althea leaned in, her voice low. "You learn quickly, Ambassador." Roland couldn't hide a soft chuckle. "I'm motivated." Yet the electricity of the moment was abruptly tempered by Emperor Orlan's arrival. He stepped toward them, applause still hanging in the air. "A splendid display of cultural exchange," he proclaimed, though his tone was as guarded as it was polite. The Emperor's gaze flickered between Roland and Althea with an inscrutable expression. "Ambassador Hayes, we have an ancient custom here, reserved for those who show unusual promise." He paused. "I would invite you to undergo the trials of Renshaw, should you wish to deepen your ties with Vainleth Prime. It is a tradition that proves the worth of anyone seeking a more permanent position in our world." Confusion and curiosity washed over Roland. He stole a glance at Althea, who looked uncharacteristically serious. "The trials of Renshaw, father?" she asked, her voice soft. Emperor Orlan inclined his head. "I recall you told me the ambassador has shown exceptional qualities. Let us see if such qualities hold true under scrutiny." Roland inhaled, realizing there was subtext here, possibly about gaining the Emperor's personal approval, perhaps as a suitor. Yet Orlan's neutral tone gave no hint of malice, only a regal challenge. "I'm honored," Roland said at last, bowing politely. His mind whirled, but he knew a refusing would be a grave insult. Althea lowered her gaze, her shoulders tensing. Clearly the trials were not to be taken lightly. "We will discuss the details tomorrow," Orlan concluded, signaling the end of the conversation. Then he turned and departed, leaving the princess and the ambassador standing under the watchful eyes of an entire courtyard. The night wore on, and Roland found sleep elusive. The trials of Renshaw occupied his thoughts, as did the memory of Althea's hesitant expression. Before dawn, a discreet knock sounded at his door. When he opened it, Princess Althea stood there, wrapped in a hooded cloak. She slipped inside, quietly closing the door behind her. Shadows played across her face in the dim light. "I had to see you," she whispered. "Father's announcement was as much a surprise to me as it was to you." Roland rubbed sleep from his eyes. "What do these trials involve?" he asked, equally hushed. Althea hesitated. They are 7 in total, each symbolizing a foundational virtue of Vayanleth: wisdom, strength, endurance, spirit, devotion, creation, and unity. Only those truly accepted into our highest circles, through blood, marriage, or extraordinary service, undergo them. She began pacing his small suite, the cloak swirling around her. I fear that if you fail, it might jeopardize everything, the alliance and us. Roland stepped forward, gently catching her arm. Then we'll figure out how to succeed, he said, trying to exude a confidence he only half felt. Althea's mercury eyes shone in the low light. Father believes you might be worthy. But these trials are not mere ceremonies. They will test every facet of your character and capability. Some have compared them to forging steel. You either come out stronger or you break. They spoke for hours, Althea offering her knowledge of each trial's symbolic significance. The trial of wisdom, she explained, usually involved a rigorous test of Vaynleth's historical knowledge and moral judgments drawn from complex local lore. Strength tested physical prowess in a ceremonial duel, while endurance required surviving in the harsh desert environment for a specified period. Spirit demanded embracing the empathic connection that some Vaynleth people possessed, opening one's mind to telepathic resonance. Devotion was about genuine commitment, requiring vulnerability. Creation involved contributing something novel or beneficial to Vaynleth's culture or society. Finally, unity tested the synergy between the participant and the planet's people, often culminating in a sacred rite reserved for bondmates or spouses. When the first sliver of dawn lightened the sky, Althea steeled herself to leave before palace staff discovered she was gone. With one hand on the door, she turned back to Roland. I don't know if I should encourage you or warn you away, she confessed, voice trembling. You owe us nothing, not even your last chocolate bar. A soft smile curved Roland's lips. I'd do it again, he said quietly, recalling how it had all begun. She blinked, and he felt the emotion radiating from her. Then, with a nod, she slipped into the corridor. For a long time, Roland stood by the door, the hush of the pre-dawn palace wrapping around him. He knew the trials would pose challenges unlike any he had faced. Yet, as he recalled Althea's touch and the intensity in her eyes, a sense of purpose infused his resolve. That morning, official word arrived through the Emperor's steward. Roland would begin the trials of Renshaw in 3 days. In the meantime, he was to prepare as best he could. The rest of the palace staff seemed on edge, some with excitement at the unprecedented scenario of a Terran undertaking the trials, others with dread at the potential scandal should he fail. Roland steeled himself for what lay ahead. He was a trained diplomat, true, but something deeper than professionalism spurred him on now. Love, attraction, destiny, possibly all three. Whatever the case, there was no turning back. Those 3 days were a blur. Roland devoted every spare moment to researching Vaynleth's customs and history. Althea provided discreet guidance, feeding him anecdotes and lessons from ancient texts, many of which came from the palace's private archives. When official matters demanded Roland's presence in the Emperor's council chambers, Althea was often there, though they maintained a formal distance in public. Yet her quicksilver eyes would meet his across the room, offering wordless encouragement. At the appointed hour, the Emperor led Roland to a secluded section of the palace gardens for the trial of wisdom. Sculpted plants with glowing leaves formed a labyrinth, at the center of which sat a circular stone dais. Roland stood on it, accompanied by 3 learned judges from the Royal College. One judge, Master Calvar, announced the rules. He would be presented with moral quandaries based on real Vaynleth historical events. He had to select the course of action that aligned most with the planet's guiding virtues. It sounded simple in concept, but the scenarios were intricate, laden with political tensions, cultural specifics, and ethical dilemmas that left little room for black and white answers. Each scenario tested not only his memory of the newly acquired knowledge, but also his moral compass. Were he to argue for direct confrontation in a scenario, he had to justify how it aligned with compassion or communal welfare. If he chose subtle negotiation, he had to address potential betrayals inherent in such strategies. In each question, Roland sensed the judges pushing him to reveal his personal convictions. After the final scenario, there was a long silence. The hush was broken only by the faint hum of the bioluminescent plants. Finally, Master Calvar nodded. He has answered with a keen sense of empathy and reason, the scholar proclaimed. Such wisdom does credit to both Terran culture and the spirit of Vaenleth. Roland felt a rush of relief, though it was tempered by immediate awareness that this was only the first of 7 trials. The Emperor, who had observed quietly from the garden's periphery, offered a subdued nod. Then you may proceed to the trial of strength, Ambassador Hayes. Sentries escorted him to an open-air arena within the palace walls. Spectators gathered in stone bleachers. Even some of the Terran delegates attended, anxious to see how Roland would fare. A hush descended as a champion of the Emperor, a skilled warrior named Shinar, stepped forward, armed with a ceremonial staff that flickered with embedded crystals. Althea had told Roland about the local fighting style, which utilized an innate sensitivity to electromagnetic fields that Terrans lacked. However, she had also told him humans were prized for their adaptability, that with discipline, they could learn to counter or at least mitigate certain exotic fighting forms. The duel began and Shinar's staff glimmered with crackling energy. Roland used a specially adapted baton that the palace artificers had prepared for him, designed to intercept and redirect some of the staff's energy. Even so, each blow vibrated through Roland's arms like an electric shock. Moments stretched into minutes as they circled each other. Shinar launched feints to test Roland's reactions, and Roland responded with deliberate, measured strikes. Sweat poured from him, not just from the physical exertion, but from the scorching heat. The crowd murmured as Roland found an opening and struck Shinar's staff near the hilt, disrupting the energy flow enough to stagger the warrior. Seizing the moment, he disarmed Shinar with a swift twist of his wrist. The staff clattered to the sandy floor of the arena. Panting heavily, Roland readied himself for a counterattack. But Shinar knelt in defeat, acknowledging the Terran's victory. Applause echoed from the stands. That evening, after medical staff treated a few minor burns on Roland's forearms, Emperor Orlan addressed him in private. You have passed the second trial. Few outsiders have done so, let alone a Terran. Prepare for the trial of endurance next. Your worth is not yet fully proven. He spoke in measured tones, neither condescending nor overly impressed. But for a flicker of a moment, Roland thought he saw a glint in Orlan's eyes, something bordering on respect. Wearily, Roland bowed. The next challenge loomed, and he wondered just how far his determination and Earth's cultural ideals would carry him. The morning after his trial of strength victory, Roland Hayes awoke in his chamber with the sun of Vaenleth Prime already blazing through the carved lattice windows. His muscles ached from the previous day's duel, and a dull sting burned at the edges of his bandaged forearms. Despite these discomforts, he could not afford more than a few minutes of rest. The Emperor's stewards had scheduled a short briefing for him, and the third trial, Endurance, was set to begin by midday. He found Althea waiting outside the palace's recovery ward, standing among the carefully tended desert flora that thrived in the palace gardens. She wore a simple but elegant sash embroidered with swirling patterns reminiscent of the planet's twin suns. You look better than I feared, she said, folding her hands in front of her. Roland heard relief under her poised tone, and he managed a smile. I've been through worse scrapes, he replied, though the actual number of times he had faced life-and-death combat was minimal. Being a diplomat on Earth rarely required facing an opponent wielding an electrified staff. Still, he found solace in her presence, noticing the subtle tension in her shoulders melt away when she saw him standing upright. Without waiting for further pleasantries, Althea launched into an explanation of what the trial of endurance entailed. You must survive 3 days in the Arkhan Barrens, the most unforgiving stretch of desert near our city. Water sources are few and hidden, and the heat can soar to deadly extremes when both suns reach zenith. She spoke with calm precision, her expression grave. Anyone who undergoes the trials of Renshaw is tested to ensure they can withstand what Vaenleth Prime demands of them. Roland nodded, pushing away the flutter of anxiety in his stomach. He considered that back on Earth, the desert survival training he had taken, though rudimentary, might prove helpful. Their walk took them to a part of the palace gardens that bordered a high stone wall. Beyond the wall, he could see golden dunes stretching to the horizon, broken only by jagged rock formations. Althea paused there, turning to him. The Emperor has assigned a small escort of watchers to observe from a distance, ensuring fair conduct. They will not intervene unless your life is in grave danger. If you use any kind of advanced Terran technology to cheat, you fail. If you attempt to leave the Barrens, you fail. Survive, and you pass. Despite the seriousness of her words, Roland detected a tremor in her voice. He gently caught her hand, glancing around to ensure they were momentarily alone. "I'll make it back," he assured her, dropping his voice. Her mercury-like eyes flickered with concern, but she allowed a gentle squeeze of his hand in return. In those fleeting moments, the palace walls and looming desert seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them, bound by something intangible, yet undeniably potent. Then, as if remembering herself, Althea withdrew her question. "Come, my father will speak with you before you depart." They re-entered the ornate corridors, passing courtiers who bowed to Althea. Many cast curious or wary glances at Roland. He was aware that rumors had spread swiftly. A Terran who had defeated the Emperor's champion would naturally attract attention, as would the princess's evident closeness to him. At the far end of a sunlit hallway, Emperor Orlin waited by an open archway. Outside, the shimmering desert beckoned, a trial of survival and a crucible of character. The Emperor studied Roland for a long beat, then spoke in a measured tone. "You have courage, Ambassador Hayes. But courage without endurance is like a flame that burns bright for a moment and then dies. Go, show us what you are truly made of." Roland departed the palace on foot, wearing a light desert-appropriate cloak over his environment suit. By decree, he could carry only basic supplies: 2 days' worth of water, a small knife, a flint for fire, and no advanced Terran technology beyond minor climate regulation integrated into his suit. The watchers, 6 palace guards, fanned out behind him, keeping a respectful distance but maintaining visual contact. He felt their presence like looming shadows. To pass this trial, he would need to navigate the Arcan Barrens, hunting for hidden water deposits and sheltering from the sun's fiercest rays when necessary. The moment he stepped beyond the palace grounds, the heat intensified. Sand whipped against his face, and the twin suns glared overhead like radiant sentinels. Each step sank into the burning dunes, making progress slow and exhausting. Roland tried to recall every piece of desert survival knowledge gleaned from Earth-based training modules. He recognized the signs of dehydration, the necessity to conserve water, the importance of finding shade during peak daylight. Yet the Arcan Barrens were more brutal than any Earth desert he had known. Even the environment suit's thermal dampeners struggled to cope, cycling higher and higher as midday approached. Around midday, he spotted a formation of rocks that provided partial shade, an indentation that might serve as a temporary shelter. He took the opportunity to rest, carefully sipping water and nibbling on a compact Terran energy wafer. Gazing out at the endless sea of dunes, he wondered if Althea was thinking of him, and how she might fare if their positions were reversed. The watchers remained at the periphery, their silhouettes distorted by rippling heat waves. A wave of gratitude washed over him for the empathy she had shown in preparing him, even though her warnings had barely scratched the surface of this reality. When dusk finally arrived, the temperature mercifully dropped, though not as drastically as he might have hoped. Von Leth's triple moons began their ascension, casting eerie light across the endless dunes. In the waning twilight, Roland located a small depression in the sand where shards of a pale crystal jutted out, an indication of underground moisture, according to the notes Althea had given him. He dug, using his bare hands and the small knife, until his nails were caked with sand and sweat dripped from his brow. Eventually, the sand turned damp, and with a bit of patience, he managed to fill his water container with enough brackish fluid to sustain him another day. He forced himself to stay vigilant throughout the night, sleeping only in short intervals. Strange desert creatures prowled in the darkness, their glowing eyes reflected by moonlight. Though none approached him directly, the sounds of distant snarls and rustling made sleep fitful at best. Each time he woke, he glanced at the watchers' lights in the far distance, verifying they were still there. Part of him bristled at their presence. He had always valued self-reliance, but another part felt relieved that he was not entirely alone. By the start of his 3rd day, Roland's water rations were critically low. The ever-present dryness bit at his skin, and his environment suit's battery for climate regulation had dipped into its final reserves. Late that afternoon, he felt his muscles weaken and his head grow heavy as he trudged forward. The swirling desert haze made it difficult to distinguish mirages from actual landforms. His foot caught on an unseen slope, and he tumbled down the far side of a dune in a cascade of sand. Disoriented, he lay there, chest heaving, the searing glare of the twin suns pushing him to the brink of surrender. Summoning the last of his willpower, Roland recalled the faces of those he fought for, Earth's people, who needed this alliance, and Althea, whose worried eyes haunted him more than the scorching desert. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself up. Stumbling onward, he finally spotted a faint outline of the palace walls in the hazy distance. Relief warred with exhaustion as he made for the city's outer gates. Within an hour, he collapsed at the boundary, where the watchers swiftly confirmed he was still alive, albeit barely. As consciousness ebbed, Roland vaguely registered the distant sound of the palace's commotion. He had lasted the appointed time, and with that, he passed out. The desert's challenge met, if only just. When Roland awakened, he found himself back in the palace infirmary, swathed in bandages and hooked to intravenous fluids that replenished his dehydrated body. Soft, luminescent tiles glowed underfoot, and the walls were painted with serene murals of past emperors. Drifting in and out of a hazy doze, he saw Althea seated by his bedside. Her once poised demeanor wavered, relief evident in her gaze. "You're safe," she murmured, voice trembling. He attempted to speak, but his throat felt raw, so he settled for a weak nod. For 2 days, he rested under the watchful eye of palace healers who administered salves to soothe the sunburn and regenerating solutions to treat minor tissue damage. Althea visited often, sometimes reading ancient Van Leithian poetry aloud. It calmed him, though he understood little of the archaic language. The sound of her voice, melodic and comforting, was enough. On the 3rd day, Emperor Orlan arrived. He inspected Roland's condition from a measured distance, his expression guarded. "The trial of endurance is complete," he stated. "Few have returned from the Archean barons with so few resources, let alone outsiders. You have shown fortitude. Now rest, for you have 4 more trials to face." Though his body was weak, Roland's spirit soared. He had passed the halfway mark, 3 trials down, 4 remaining. The next challenge would be the trial of spirit. According to Althea, it was both the most mysterious and potentially the most harrowing. It entailed attuning oneself to a telepathic resonance that existed among those with Van Leth's ancient bloodline. "It's a test of openness," Althea said one evening as they walked through a tranquil courtyard, "a willingness to experience another's essence without barriers." Roland recalled her mention of certain empathic connections that her people could form, but he had assumed they were more legend than reality. "Not legend," she clarified, leading him to a secluded alcove where geometric patterns tiled the floor. During the trial of spirit, participants undergo a psychic ritual with a specially appointed mentor, someone who guides them through the resonance. If you resist or harbor deceitful intentions, the link collapses and the trial ends in failure. Roland's brow furrowed. "I've never been telepathic," he admitted, "nor have I experienced anything like it. What if my mind simply can't connect?" Althea's eyes held both sympathy and a spark of determination. "You must trust yourself and trust that the bond we share is real." She gestured for him to sit upon a circular cushion. The courtyard's atmosphere was calm, perfumed with faint traces of desert blossoms. "Focus on me," she instructed, her voice hardly above a whisper. "We've already begun forming a link through our interactions, something intangible but potent. Let your thoughts meet mine halfway." He hesitated, feeling somewhat foolish, yet complied, closing his eyes. At first, he sensed only the usual swirl of his own mind, worries, hopes, stray daydreams. Gradually, he felt a subtle current pulling, as though a gentle tide nudged at the periphery of his consciousness. Seconds bled into minutes. A faint pressure built behind his forehead, and for a split second, a flurry of impressions, not his own, flickered in his mind's eye. Images of Althea as a child, a swirl of feelings, curiosity, longing, responsibility. Gasping, he broke the connection, blinking rapidly. Althea looked equally unsettled, her pale skin tinged pink around the cheeks. That's just a small taste, she managed. The actual ritual will be much deeper. It won't be me who guides you, though. It will be another, someone appointed by my father. I wanted you to be prepared. The appointed day for the trial of spirit came quickly. By then, Roland's physical wounds had largely healed, and his internal anxieties had only multiplied. He was summoned to a secret chamber deep under the palace's northern wing. Torches of bioluminescent fungus cast ethereal light across the stone walls, illuminating engraved symbols that trace back centuries in Van Leth's royal lineage. The air felt charged, thick with a sense of ritual and history. At the chamber's center stood a low table. On it lay various objects: a silver basin filled with water, a small glass orb containing swirling mist, and a smooth onyx stone etched with more of those enigmatic symbols. Two robed figures awaited him: an elderly woman named High Seer Allura, tasked with initiating the telepathic link, and a younger attendant who would record the event for the royal archives. Emperor Orlan and Althea watched from the periphery, their faces partially obscured by the chamber's dim lighting. High Seer Allura beckoned Roland forward. Her voice, cracked with age yet resonant, filled the room. "Close your eyes, Terran. Place your hands upon the stone. We shall see if your spirit aligns with the essence of Van Leth." Roland swallowed hard but complied, pressing his palms against the cool, etched surface. It felt almost alive, pulsing faintly under his fingertips. Allura began chanting in a language Roland didn't recognize, but the rhythmic cadence lulled him into a meditative state. At first, he felt only the ambient hum of his own nerves, but soon there was a tug, a gentle but insistent pull at the edges of his consciousness. He surrendered to it, and a flood of images, emotions, and sensations poured in. The boundaries of self blurred, and he sensed not just Allura's presence, but echoes of countless others who had undertaken this trial through generations past. It was a tapestry of memories: joyous coronations, brutal wars, harvest celebrations, births, deaths, a cycle of lifetimes weaving through him in dizzying succession. Among the torrent, he sensed a familiar thread, a bright, silvery thread that evoked comfort and longing. Focusing on it, Roland recognized Althea's essence. He glimpsed glimpses of her childhood, her shy, determined face studying the intricacies of palace protocol, a rebellious streak that led her to wander outside the palace walls to see the real city. He felt her early cynicism about the carefully managed world around her, how trust in her environment was often mere currency. A wave of compassion enveloped him. Then the images shifted to Roland's own memories, pulled to the surface by this psychic exchange. His earliest recollections on Earth: sunlit meadows, school friendships, awkward teenage crushes, heartbreak, the pride of being accepted into the Terran diplomatic corps, and the weight of carrying Earth's hopes into the galaxy. A sense of vulnerability swept him. He was bearing his very soul to an alien tradition, with no guarantee they would not find him lacking. Yet, within that vulnerability, he sensed Althea's unwavering support, a gentle warmth that threaded through the swirling chaos. Abruptly, the rush of visions receded, like a tidal wave withdrawing back into a vast ocean. Roland staggered, breath catching in his throat, as the psychic link snapped. He opened his eyes, finding High Seer Allura watching him with an expression hovering between awe and relief. The onyx stone beneath his hands glowed faintly, as if charged by residual energy. Allura's voice echoed. "He does not resist. He does not seek to deceive. The Terran spirit stands open, and Van Leth acknowledges him." Emperor Orlan's gaze met Roland's across the chamber, and though he maintained his regal composure, the tension in his face eased. Althea's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. In the following days, Roland walked the palace halls with a new sense of belonging. Word had spread of his successful completion of the trial of spirit, and courtiers whispered less about the scandal of a Terran courting the princess, more about the surprising depth of his character. He had passed 4 of the trials of Renshaw. Only 3 remained: devotion, creation, and unity. Yet for all the progress he had made, he also sensed a looming weight to what lay ahead. Althea began preparing him for the trial of devotion, which hinged upon demonstrating genuine commitment to Van Leth and, by extension, to Althea. She guided him to the hidden corners of the royal library, rows upon rows of ancient tomes and fragile manuscripts. Late one evening, they pored over texts detailing royal marriages, pledges of fealty, and binding oaths that transcended political alliances. The library itself was mesmerizing, elongated vaults with gently glowing glyphs etched into archways, the faint hum of knowledge reverberating in the air. Sitting across from one another at a wide marble table, Althea explained, "In our traditions, devotion is not merely a vow spoken aloud. It is tested through action, sacrifice, and empathy. For many, it means renouncing personal gain for the greater good, or relinquishing an inherited right to ascend the throne if it serves the people better. In your case, it will mean openly committing to me, to us, under the scrutiny of the entire royal court." Her cheeks tinted the softest blue as she spoke, a testament to her own vulnerability in this. Roland felt his heart thud in his chest. In the Terran diplomatic corps, relationships with foreign dignitaries were typically managed with caution, if not outright discouraged for fear of conflicts of interest. Yet here he was, prepared to stand before an alien court and declare his willingness to bind his future to Althea, and thus to Vonleth. He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. "My devotion is real," he said softly, his voice echoing among the shelves. "But I want to do this the right way." The next morning, he stood in a grand audience chamber. Emperor Orlan sat on his elevated seat, the court arrayed in a semicircle around him. Althea stood at her father's side, regal yet tense. Roland stepped forward, every eye upon him. He thought of Earth, of how his world's leaders might view this moment. But the memory of the psychic bond he had shared with Althea and the trials he had endured fortified him. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carrying in the hushed hall, "I request the honor of binding my future to Princess Althea, and by extension, to Vayanleth Prime." Murmurs rippled through the court, some startled, others intrigued. Emperor Orlan regarded him for a long moment, his expression impassive. Then he spoke. "Devotion is only words until it is tested by fire. In our tradition, those who seek a permanent bond must demonstrate sacrifice." A steward approached, holding a ceremonial blade fashioned from crystal. Its edge glinted with an unearthly sheen. Orlan motioned for Roland to step closer. "You will make an offering, not of blood, but of your safe illusions. Pledge with your own hand that you will stand with us, even if it costs you dearly." Understanding the gravity of the act, Roland wrapped his fingers around the blade's hilt. The crystal resonated beneath his grip, reflecting the tension in his heart. Glancing at Althea, he saw her gaze brim with concern and unspoken support. Drawing a shallow breath, he pressed the blade to the palm of his other hand, not deep enough to draw blood, but enough to leave a clear, symbolic mark. The court watched, silent, as he bowed his head and declared, "I offer my life, my honor, and my loyalty to Vayanleth Prime, in the name of my devotion to Princess Althea." The final words hung in the air, and a faint pulse seemed to reverberate through the crystal columns. Emperor Orlan's visage remained inscrutable, but behind him Althea lowered her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. News of Roland's public pledge spread swiftly throughout Barrelspire City and beyond, traveling along the planet's trade routes like wildfire. Opinions varied. Some saw it as the ultimate romantic gesture, an alien giving up everything to join their royal line, while others considered it a precarious political move that could entangle Earth and Vonleth in unforeseen complications. For Roland, the next step was the trial of creation, which required a tangible contribution to the planet's welfare. The Emperor summoned him to a tall observation tower at the palace's eastern boundary. From this vantage point, they could see miles of desert interspersed with scattered settlements. Emperor Orlan gestured broadly. "Our world has thrived on commerce, yet many of our rural enclaves remain impoverished. Provide something of benefit to these people, Ambassador. Show us a glimpse of how your Terran innovation can serve our land." Roland understood the challenge immediately. Vayanleth's harsh environment, combined with limited technology in remote areas, caused cyclical poverty and resource scarcity. If he could bring forward a sustainable solution, that would be the core of the trial of creation. Returning to the palace's workshop, Roland collaborated with local artisans who specialized in living crystal architecture, as well as Terran engineers from his diplomatic mission. After hours of brainstorming, they settled on a project that blended Earth's solar energy advancements with Von Leth's biocrystal growth. What if we embed Terran solar converters into the crystal formations, one Terran engineer proposed. They could both harness solar power and use the ambient energy to stimulate localized plant growth in the desert. The idea was ambitious, but it offered a chance to make a lasting impact. Over the next 10 days, they worked tirelessly. Roland frequently visited the workshop, overseeing prototypes of spherical crystal lattice devices mounted with miniature solar cells. These devices glowed faintly with stored energy, capable of powering irrigation pumps or low-voltage lighting. Even Althea joined in, offering her knowledge of local flora that could thrive under carefully guided crystal lattice conditions. Her presence proved invaluable, as she understood the subtle synergy between Van Leth's environment and Terran technology, particularly which angles, temperatures, and placements would optimize power collection while encouraging plant growth. When the first shipment of prototypes was ready, the Emperor gave his blessing for them to be tested in a remote desert community known as Herath Oasis. Roland, Althea, and several palace advisors traveled there under armed escort, crossing dunes that once again reminded Roland of his grueling trial of endurance. The oasis itself was modest, a cluster of mud brick structures, a shallow well, and a few hardy trees. As local residents gathered to watch, the engineers installed the crystal lattice devices near the central well. Once activated, a low hum rose, and the crystals began to glow. Minutes later, water pumped up from deeper beneath the sand, offering cleaner and more abundant access. The reactions ranged from stunned silence to cautious excitement. Children approached the devices warily, their curiosity piqued. Althea smiled as she demonstrated how to operate the pumps, switching flows from one field to another. She explained that if the project proved successful, additional devices would be distributed across multiple outlying regions. "This is how Terrans often solve problems," Roland told an elderly villager. "We adapt technology to local conditions, hoping to improve day-to-day life." The villager nodded thoughtfully, eyes bright with cautious hope. Their field tests showed immense promise. The technology wasn't perfect. Some solar cells needed adjustments to withstand the swirling desert sands, and the living crystals occasionally overgrew their casing if not pruned. Yet the initial results were enough to spark optimism. Upon returning to the palace, Roland presented the outcome to Emperor Orlan and the gathered council. "We have begun to create something beneficial for your people," he concluded. "With proper cooperation and refinement, we can expand this innovation across Von Leth, bridging the gap between our worlds for the welfare of all." Emperor Orlan's stony countenance wavered, revealing a sliver of admiration. Thus, the trial of creation was deemed a success, leaving only the final hurdle: unity. The Trial of Unity was the capstone of the Trials of Renshaw, a sacred ceremony that fused the spiritual, emotional, and physical bonds between the participant and the royal line. If Roland had found the previous trials daunting, this one loomed like the pinnacle of an uncharted mountain. According to tradition, the ceremony took place on the third full moon cycle, in a sanctum so ancient that even palace historians debated its origins. Althea explained in hushed tones that only those who had completed the first 6 trials, and thus proven themselves worthy, were ever permitted within. On the night of the ceremony, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The corridors were lit with candles made from bioresin, flickering in mesmerizing patterns against the polished floors. Courtiers in regal attire navigated the hallways, whispering in excited undertones. At the appointed hour, Althea arrived at Roland's chamber, accompanied by 2 attendants. She wore ceremonial robes that shimmered like liquid starshine, embroidered with symbols representing each of the 7 trials. Her eyes glistened, reflecting a mixture of anxiety and determination. "This final step," she said quietly, "isn't just for the sake of custom. It's a true merging of hearts and minds. If we complete it, our connection will be unlike anything experienced by most on Von Leth or Earth." Roland recalled the fleeting impressions he had gleaned during the trial of spirit. Now he felt both exhilaration and a hint of trepidation. "I'm ready," he responded, mustering a firmness in his voice. Her lips curved into a gentle smile as she motioned for the attendants to guide them to the sanctum. The sanctum lay deep beneath the palace, reached by descending a spiral staircase carved from solid crystal. Each step pulsed faintly underfoot, as if resonating with the energy of the participants. The corridor opened into a grand cavern lit by natural luminescence. Phosphorescent minerals in the walls glowed in hues of turquoise and lavender. A circular pool occupied the center, its surface rippling with water that was said to flow from subterranean springs older than recorded history. Emperor Orlan, High Seer Allura, and a handful of other key figures stood in attendance, forming a semicircle around the pool. At a nod from Allura, Roland and Althea stepped onto a shallow platform that extended over the pool's surface. Allura began chanting, a rhythmic incantation that reverberated in Roland's bones, reminding him of the telepathic bond formed during the trial of spirit. Althea placed one hand against Roland's chest, and he mirrored her gesture, palm over her heart. A soft, resonant hum filled the cavern, as though the very air thrummed with anticipation. With every syllable of Allura's chant, Roland felt that psychic connection reawaken, deeper and more potent this time. Althea's presence enveloped him, a tapestry of emotions, memories, aspirations. He offered up his own spirit in return, a swirl of determination, humility, and affection that pulsed outward. Their breaths synchronized. Their heartbeats fell into a unified rhythm. The water in the pool began to glow, casting shimmering patterns across the crystal walls. Allura's chant reached a crescendo, and with one final elongated note, the psychic resonance blazed between Roland and Althea, momentarily suspending all sense of the outside world. When the light subsided, they found themselves still standing, hands pressed over each other's hearts, but now bound by a sensation so vivid it defied words. They were separate individuals, yet they shared an undercurrent of thought and feeling that transcended normal awareness. Emperor Orlan broke the silence with a clear, ringing voice. The trial of unity is complete. Let it be known that Roland Hayes of Earth and Princess Althea of Vaonleth Prime have forged a bond recognized by our ancient rites. In the eyes of our people and the cosmos, they stand as one. A ripple of applause echoed through the cavern, but Roland scarcely heard it. His entire focus was on Althea, whose eyes reflected the luminous pool like two glimmering moons. He sensed her relief, her joy, her slight tremor of disbelief that they had come this far. Through their newly forged link, she whispered, without speaking, "We are finally united." Roland felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He grasped her hand, anchoring them both in that moment. Though countless challenges still lay ahead, political intricacies, cultural adjustments, perhaps even skepticism from Earth, this instant was theirs. They had completed the trials of Renshaw against every odd, and sealed their partnership in body, mind, and spirit. The trial of unity had ended with Roland and Althea bound in both a deeply personal way and the eyes of Vaonleth Prime. In the days that followed, celebrations rippled through the palace and the city beyond. Courtiers offered their congratulations, albeit with varying degrees of sincerity. The common folk, many of whom had never set foot in the royal precinct, flocked to Barrelspire City's main avenues, hoping to catch a glimpse of the newly bonded couple. Amidst this commotion, Emperor Orlan declared a festival honoring their union, its highlights including feasts and spectacular dance performances by troops from every major region of Vaonleth. Roland found himself whisked away from one ceremony to the next, often overwhelmed by the swirl of new customs and local dignitaries demanding his attention. In quiet interludes, he would retreat with Althea to the palace gardens, where they strolled hand in hand among luminescent flowers and shimmering ornamental pools. Though physically separate, their minds still hummed with the empathic resonance forged during the ceremony. Sometimes they caught each other's thoughts so acutely that words became optional. Beneath the merriment, both were acutely aware that life was set to become more complicated. Althea's status as heir to Vaonleth's throne carried weighty obligations, including forging alliances, overseeing court policies, and balancing the intricate politics that the emperor managed daily. Roland, meanwhile, was still officially a Terran diplomat, albeit one now intimately tied to the planet he was supposed to negotiate with. They spent hours deliberating how to handle Earth's concerns about divided loyalties. Althea encouraged him to remain a diplomatic bridge between the two worlds, convinced that if handled properly, his dual roles might evolve into a profound advantage rather than a conflict of interest. Roland recognized the truth in her words, but the shadow of potential scandal lingered. Just as they began to settle into a new rhythm, a summons arrived from the Emperor's private council. Orlan convened a meeting in a small, high-ceilinged chamber lined with mirrors that distorted sounds and reflections in fascinating ways, an architectural safeguard against eavesdropping. Althea stood at her father's side, and Roland sensed her tension through their bond before she even spoke. Emperor Orlan's expression was grim as he outlined the situation. A powerful interstellar faction known as the Kashad Coalition had issued a dire ultimatum. Either Vayanleth Prime would curtail its new ties with Earth or face crippling trade sanctions that could destabilize the fragile desert economy. The members of the Emperor's inner council muttered among themselves, some advocating immediate compliance to avoid ruin, others pushing for defiance but offering no clear plan to mitigate the fallout. Roland spoke up, voice tinged with urgency. The coalition acts out of fear. They see our partnership as a threat to the old balance of power. If Vayanleth Prime and Earth can demonstrate mutual prosperity, that leaves less room for them to dominate smaller systems. Despite nods from some counselors, the majority remained unconvinced. The threat of losing essential supplies, particularly refined metals and off-world medicines, loomed large in the minds of Vayanleth's leadership. Emperor Orlan turned to his daughter, his stoic facade revealing cracks of concern. Althea, you have always championed new ways. If you see a path that preserves our sovereignty without igniting war, speak it now. Althea drew in a slow breath, mentally reaching for Roland's reassurance before answering. If we capitulate, we become pawns. If we fight alone, we risk catastrophe. I propose we offer the Kashad Coalition something far more valuable than isolation. Collaboration. Show them what we have built in a short span, innovations for desert living, shared intelligence that could revitalize their own resource-depleted worlds. Roland added, our bond represents more than a personal union. It stands for the potential of interspecies cooperation. This dual presentation caught the Council's attention, sowing seeds of cautious optimism. Over the next hour, they hashed out details of a provisional plan. Invite Kashad envoys to witness firsthand how Vayanleth, with Terran technology, had begun transforming the Arcane Barrens and other deserts into more habitable zones. Offer them a pilot project to rejuvenate a section of their territory, an undeniable demonstration of the benefits of alliance. In exchange, the coalition would end sanctions and possibly establish a new triplanetary commerce route. It was bold, even risky, but it provided an alternative to economic surrender or military confrontation. By the meeting's end, Emperor Orlan nodded his assent, and the plan was set in motion. In the weeks leading to the coalition's arrival, Roland and Althea worked tirelessly. Their days began early, reviewing agricultural prototypes in the palace's workshops, and ended late, drafting proposals that offered mutual benefits to both Kashad worlds and Vayanleth Prime. Terran engineers stayed busy refining the solar crystal technology tested at Harith Oasis, while palace advisors coordinated a grand reception to welcome the coalition's leadership. The air in Burlspire City crackled with anticipation, laced with the anxiety that everything could unravel if the negotiations went poorly. Those high-pressure days collided with an unexpected invitation from the Pan-Universal Assembly, a sprawling interstellar body that oversaw diplomatic relations between hundreds of star systems. Impressed by Roland and Althea's story, a Terran and a Vayanlethian forging bonds through personal and cultural synergy, the Assembly considered appointing them as special envoys to mediate future disputes. The message arrived via secure holotransmission, showing the Assembly's official crest spinning in midair. Emperor Orlan, after some deliberation, saw the strategic value. If you can help forge peace beyond our own planet, he told them, Vayanleth's influence grows immeasurably. It may also deter future threats like the one from the Kashad Coalition. Even as they balanced these new opportunities, they longed for moments of respite. Late in the evening, after the swirl of diplomatic tasks subsided, the two would retreat to a quiet garden terrace. Sometimes they simply shared a small meal of Terran-inspired and Vayanlethian dishes, occasionally sipping a locally brewed beverage with subtle spice notes. Other nights, they indulged in intimate conversation, leaning on the empathic connection that made it easier to share fears and ambitions. Althea would place a single palm against Roland's chest, their bond amplifying the warmth between them, providing a safe harbor amid the storms of statecraft. The day before the Coalition's official visit, a lavish gala was held on Sorath Station, a space hub orbiting one of Vanleth's moons. Representatives from multiple planetary systems gathered to witness the unveiling of new shipping routes that would link Barrelspire City to far-flung markets. Roland and Althea attended, flanked by palace security and Terran aides. The station's grand hall was all polished metal floors and panoramic windows, revealing the moon's cracked, cratered surface. Althea wore a luminous gown woven with silver threads, symbolizing unity across star systems. Midway through the event, Roland stood by a large viewport, sipping an effervescent drink. He was admiring the swirling nebulas in the distance when a flash of movement snagged his attention. A streak of blue plasma zipped past him, scorching the metal wall with a hiss. Before his mind could register the shock, Althea's bioluminescent eyes flared, and her training in palace self-defense took over. She lunged, pushing Roland aside while palace guards quickly subdued a figure holding a concealed plasma pistol. Everything happened in a chaotic blur, shouts, echoing footsteps, the sharp tang of burned metal. The aftermath revealed a startling truth. The assailant was no simple criminal, but part of a militant group opposed to interspecies alliances. They called themselves the Pure Vanleth Circle, a fanatical sect that viewed Roland's presence and Earth's influence as a contamination of their heritage. Furious and shaking from adrenaline, Althea confronted the attacker. "We are forging a future for our people," she declared, voice trembling yet resolute. "Not destroying it." Security led the would-be assassin away, but the damage was done. The near-death experience underscored just how precarious their path was, and how many forces still stood against their union. In the immediate wake of the assassination attempt, Emperor Orlan convened an emergency council session back on Von Leth Prime. The palace swarmed with heightened security, roving patrols, new scanning devices, and a reinforced perimeter around the royal quarters. Outrage tore through many at court, prompting calls for swift reprisals against extremist factions. Others, still wary of Earth, expressed discomfort at how entangled Terran influence had become in Von Leth's internal affairs. Roland, physically unharmed but rattled by the attack, found solace in Althea's unwavering presence. Through their empathic bond, he sensed the wave of guilt that threatened to engulf her. He tried to quell her self-blame. The attempt on his life wasn't her fault. While the Emperor's investigators rooted out any additional conspirators, Roland and Althea refocused on the looming negotiations with the Keshad Coalition. They suspected the extremist factions might attempt to sabotage the talks, hoping to isolate Von Leth from Earth and entrench xenophobia. "We can't let fear dictate the future," Roland stressed during a private audience with Orlan. The Emperor gripped the armrests of his throne, wearing a fierce scowl. "Agreed. We move forward, but we move carefully. Show the Coalition that we stand united and are not so easily shaken." When the Coalition's envoy finally arrived in Barrelspire City, they did so with imposing pomp, an armada of sleek, dark-hulled vessels descending into the palace's main landing fields. Their chief representative, High Minister Shania, stepped out wearing metallic robes that caught the desert light like a mirror. Her entourage, equally formidable, included economic advisors and well-armed security details. Observers from various star systems and the Pan-Universal Assembly crowded the city's streets and upper balconies, hoping to witness history in the making. The official welcoming ceremony took place inside the palace's Great Reception Hall, where a carefully arranged spread featured both Van Lethian delicacies and Terran dishes. As Emperor Orlan, Althea, and Roland greeted the coalition party, tension rippled through the atmosphere. High Minister Shania regarded them with dispassionate eyes, her tone formal. "I have come to see if there is substance behind your claims of prosperity and cooperation," she said. "If your alliance is little more than show, we will make it known to our associates." Althea offered a measured smile, motioning toward a display of holographic projections. They showed before and after images of Harath Oasis and other pilot sites where solar crystal technology had already boosted agriculture and water access. Next came Terran data logs highlighting potential expansions. Roland supplemented the visuals with a direct appeal. These innovations can be adapted to Kashad's resource-scarce worlds. We propose a pilot project that showcases our combined expertise, reducing your dependencies on distant imports and harnessing your planetary assets. His voice resonated with sincerity, bolstered by the empathic link he felt with Althea at his side. Minister Shanea's expression softened marginally when she saw the practical applications. Still, she pressed, "And how do we trust you not to impose Terran or Veonleth hegemony on our systems? We have not forgotten the fate of smaller worlds that fell into debt traps or were exploited for cheap labor." Emperor Orlan leaned forward, his regal bearing unshakable. "We do not seek subjugation. We offer partnership. I have shared my own daughter's union with a Terran as living proof." A hush fell. It was a bold declaration, one that placed personal stakes at the heart of interstellar politics. Beneath the watchful gaze of the entire hall, Shanae inclined her head. "I will reserve judgment until we observe these sights in person," she said. "If you speak true, Kashad may have more to gain from cooperation than isolation." The coalition envoys spent a week touring pilot locations throughout Vanleth Prime, escorted by Roland, Althea, and a carefully selected team of engineers and security. Hovercraft caravans traversed desert expanses, revealing how solar crystal devices had turned previously barren regions into nascent farmland. Kashad observers took copious notes, occasionally requesting to examine the underlying software or remove a crystal panel for closer inspection. Though initially cautious, they gradually showed signs of genuine interest. One evening, the group made camp near an outpost adjacent to the Arshan Barrens, a place Roland could hardly revisit without recalling his brutal survival trial. The outpost itself had blossomed from a scrappy settlement into a modest agricultural hub, thanks to expanded water pumping and improved energy distribution. Coalition representatives watched local farmers tending newly sprouted fields under shielded lighting, the once dead soil now teeming with life. Children played alongside irrigation channels, laughing as they splashed each other. Minister Shanae observed the scene with quiet fascination, her guarded demeanor shifting with each positive encounter. Around a communal fire that night, the conversation grew more personal. Althea shared anecdotes about her childhood, reflecting how the palace, for all its grandiosity, sometimes felt like a cage. She explained how her father's emphasis on tradition both protected and stifled her, driving her curiosity about the wider galaxy. Roland, in turn, revealed stories of Earth's history, times when humanity had wrestled with its own divisions and prejudices, yet eventually found ways to unite for a greater purpose. The Kashad envoys listened, some reluctantly, others with rapt attention. Just as the warm glow of cross-cultural understanding began taking root, a harrowing message arrived from Beryl Spire City. The palace's intelligence wing had uncovered a larger network of conspirators tied to the recent assassination attempt. Althea paled as she read the encrypted dispatch on a handheld console. "They plan to strike again," she relayed grimly. "Not just at you, Roland, but at the coalition envoys. Their goal is to fracture any alliance before it can be formed." Minister Shanae tensed, demanding immediate clarity. "Is my delegation safe here?" she asked, her voice sharp with controlled alarm. Roland and Althea exchanged a resolute glance. "We have adequate security measures," Roland assured her. "But if they intend to sabotage these talks, we need to act swiftly." Within hours, Emperor Orlan's personal guard dispatched reinforcements to the outpost, setting up perimeter defenses and scanning vehicles for hidden explosives. Even as protective layers thickened, the situation exposed the precarious underbelly of forging new alliances. Not everyone wanted them to succeed. Some believed that a pure and insular Veonleth was preferable to any form of intercultural exchange. Determined not to let terror derail progress, Roland and Althea pressed on with the Kashad envoys. They sped up the timeline for formal negotiations, orchestrating a secure forum at a neutral site in the desert. An elegant pavilion was erected under the twin suns, a halfway point between the outpost and the edges of the barrens. There, surrounded by nothing but dunes and wind-sculpted rock, the final discussions commenced. Shanae placed a hollow contract on a triangular table in the pavilion's center. "If we sign this, we commit to a joint pilot project, exchange of research personnel, and a comprehensive peace accord." She glanced at Althea and Roland, But be warned, any further disruptions might cause us to abandon talks for good. Despite the tension, the negotiations concluded on a cautiously optimistic note. High Minister Shanae affixed her biometric seal to the holocontract, followed by Emperor Orlan, with Roland and Althea acting as witnesses. Word reached the capital soon after, and crowds gathered to celebrate what they hoped would mark a turning point in interstellar diplomacy. Yet the euphoria was tinged with vigilance. No one forgot how narrowly violence had been averted. The next day, the coalition envoys departed Von Leth Prime, promising to reconvene after evaluating the pilot projects on their homeworlds. The momentum from that success propelled Roland and Althea into another vortex of activity. The Pan-Universal Assembly issued a formal invitation, requesting them to serve as traveling envoys, mediating conflicts in frontier sectors. The Emperor gave his blessing, acknowledging that his daughter and her Terran partner had proven themselves as catalysts for peace. Althea especially yearned to see how their bond could inspire other worlds caught in discord. So with a small retinue of palace guards and Terran aides, they embarked on a circuit of diplomatic missions spanning multiple systems. At first, Roland found the constant movement exhilarating. Each new station or planet offered fresh cultural vistas, singing reefs on ocean worlds, floating cities atop gas giants, treetop settlements in lush, gravity-light forests. Althea, meanwhile, marveled at the differences between these societies and Von Leth. Everywhere they went, people clamored to learn about their empathic union and how it had sealed a major alliance. Some envied Von Leth's newly minted reputation as a beacon of cooperation. Others sought to replicate it. In a few places, however, entrenched powers eyed the couple with suspicion, treating their empathy-based bond as a manipulation tool. Amid these journeys, they still found moments to nurture each other. Their evenings, whether on starships or in guest suites of alien palaces, were spent exchanging stories of the day, replaying or clarifying each other's experiences through their shared mental link. The bond provided a depth of intimacy neither had foreseen back when Roland had first offered his lone Vitaka cow bar to a seemingly impoverished woman. Indeed, that chance meeting now felt like a fateful pivot in both their lives, merging love with destiny in a way that made both of them marvel. During a high-profile conference on Torval Sector, the couple faced yet another challenge, this time medical in nature. Althea had been feeling faint, and her bioluminescent complexion occasionally flared at unpredictable intervals. Roland worried it might be residue stress from the assassination attempt or their hectic travel schedule. Urgent as the conference was, he insisted she undergo a medical exam. The onboard physician, accompanied by a Terran geneticist, examined Althea using both Van Lethian healing techniques and Earth-based scanners. An hour later, they emerged with expressions of cautious excitement. "Princess Althea," the geneticist said, "we have confirmed that you're carrying a child, a human Van Lethian hybrid." The news struck like a meteor shower, filling the small med bay with stunned silence. Roland's mind reeled, half with joy, half with questions. Althea's initial shock gave way to a radiant glow, both literal and metaphorical. Through their empathic bond, she whispered, "This is a new frontier for both our species." Roland, breathless, clasped her hands, the reality of fatherhood hitting him in one overwhelming wave. The geneticist explained that while no documented cases existed of such a pregnancy, the early indicators looked promising. It appeared their empathic resonance might actually reduce the risk of complications that cross-species gestations sometimes entailed. Returning to Von Leth Prime to share the news with Emperor Orlan felt both exhilarating and daunting. They found him in his private study, poring over star charts that detailed new commercial routes sparked by the pilot projects. Althea's announcement of her pregnancy brought a rare crack in his usually composed facade. Emperor Orlan set aside the charts and embraced his daughter, the stern lines of his face softening. Though he had never expected this trajectory for his royal bloodline, he confessed genuine excitement for the future. "Your child," he said, voice trembling slightly, "will be the living embodiment of our alliance. They will carry the hopes of two worlds, and perhaps many more." Word spread quickly through the palace, igniting fresh discussions about genetic compatibility, inheritance laws, and potential reforms needed to accommodate a hybrid heir. Some factions viewed the pregnancy as a miracle, Others saw it as a cultural crisis that upended centuries of Van Lethian tradition. Yet Althea and Roland navigated the polarized reactions with the same calm resolve that had carried them through each of the 7 trials. The emperor's unwavering support certainly helped, quelling immediate dissent from the more conservative elements of the court. A few months later, as Althea's figure began to show the subtle signs of expectant motherhood, Roland received an update from the Pan-Universal Assembly. They praised the success of the Kashad project, which had begun revitalizing portions of the coalition's resource-depleted worlds. A formal envoy from the coalition even extended an invitation for a ceremonial summit to be held on neutral ground at the newly completed Unity Nexus, an interplanetary cultural center financed by multiple star systems, including Earth and Vanleth. The Assembly's message was clear. Roland and Althea were expected to officiate the center's inauguration, symbolizing the transformative power of their bond. Despite her pregnancy, Althea insisted on traveling. She argued that the birth of their child, far from being a hindrance, was an even stronger statement of unity. Reluctantly, Roland and Emperor Orlan conceded, arranging a meticulously safe voyage through secured space lanes. The entire journey felt momentous, as though they were on the verge of another major milestone that might redefine galactic relations. When they finally arrived at the Unity Nexus, a gleaming structure of interlocked spires and architectural influences from a dozen civilizations, the turnout of diplomats and onlookers astounded them. A large amphitheater served as the backdrop for the inauguration, with ambassadors, royal delegates, and even curious civilians in attendance. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and possibility. Dressed in a gown that artfully concealed her growing belly, Althea delivered a speech that soared beyond typical diplomatic pleasantries. She spoke of how the simplest act, one person offering food to a stranger, had sparked a chain of events leading to this moment. Roland, standing beside her, followed with his own remarks, weaving in Earth's tumultuous history of conflict and reconciliation. The crowd listened in hushed awe. They embodied living proof that mutual respect and collaboration could surmount ancient barriers. A wave of applause filled the amphitheater when they finished. In that charged moment, a young couple, one from a water world, the other from a species that lived in low-gravity canopies, approached. They confessed that Roland and Althea's story had inspired them to follow their own hearts, defying the reservations of their families. With bright smiles and clasped hands, they announced their engagement right there, prompting a swirl of cheers. Althea's eyes glistened, and Roland felt her surge of hope ripple through their bond. Indeed, the Unity Nexus was more than a building. It was a beacon for every couple, every group of disparate beings, striving to find common ground in an ever-widening cosmos. The completion of the Unity Nexus marked a pivotal shift in galactic affairs. Greater interest in cross-species partnerships, new regulatory frameworks to protect interplanetary relationships, and expanded trade routes. Yet, for Roland and Althea, the greatest changes lay in the realm of the personal. Althea's pregnancy advanced with relative smoothness, guided by a team of Van Lethian healers and Terran doctors who collaborated on every stage. The medical breakthroughs from their case even spurred new research grants and collaborative studies, opening horizons for other couples who might dare to traverse similar frontiers. Their schedule eventually eased, allowing them a precious opportunity to slip away from palace obligations. One late afternoon, they returned to the very spot in Barrelspire City where they had first met, the dusty corner where Althea had once crouched in feigned poverty, cloaked in ragged clothing. The city had changed in subtle ways. A few new buildings rose in the distance, and an old market stall had been replaced by a gleaming kiosk selling artisanal trinkets. Still, the deserted stretch of street remained recognizable, bathed in the glow of the setting suns. Standing there, Althea felt a wave of nostalgia, her hand instinctively resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen. Roland quietly reached into his pocket, producing a small bar of Terran chocolate, one he had saved for a meaningful occasion. He snapped it in half, offering a piece to her just as he had done months ago, and in a far different context. She accepted it with a fond laugh, eyes shimmering under the dusty orange light. "You know," she said softly, "when you handed me that ration bar the first time, I thought you were either hopelessly naive or absurdly generous." Roland chuckled, biting into the sweet, rich taste of home. "Perhaps it was a bit of both. But look where that small gesture led us. They savored the chocolate in reflective silence, memories dancing between them. His formal bow in the palace, her mischievous smile during clandestine nighttime meetings, the harrowing trials, the near-fatal attempts to upend their alliance, and the triumphant forging of new bonds between worlds. Through their empathic link, they swirled in a shared tapestry of gratitude and awe. Finally, Althea's voice broke the moment. Our child, do you think they'll inherit your Terran resilience or my Van Lethian empathy? Roland's features softened with wonder. With any luck, both. Althea leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of crimson and violet. In the distance, city lights began to twinkle, a testament to the civilization they had helped guide toward a more inclusive future. As they stood in the hush of twilight, they felt the stirring of a promise even greater than any signed treaty, the promise of a new life, bridging two species that once seemed worlds apart. And in that moment, Roland squeezed her hand, recalling that everything had begun with an act of compassion. One last chocolate bar, and the unspoken bond it ignited in a lonely street. They lingered until darkness settled, aware that their journey was far from over, yet comforted by the knowledge that love, trust, and shared purpose would guide them through whatever the cosmos might bring next. From my own perspective, this story is a powerful testament to the resilience of hope and empathy. A single moment of kindness, one shared chocolate bar, evolved into a grand alliance that bridged cultural gaps and overcame the fiercest opposition. At its core, it's a reminder that compassion has the power to unify worlds, opening doors where skepticism once reigned. Watching the two protagonists transform from strangers into key figures in galactic cooperation shows how courage, commitment, and personal sacrifice can reshape destinies. I feel inspired by how their journey balances heart-stopping action with the nurturing of genuine love. It's a tale that leaves us optimistic about humanity and every other species when we stand together. What are your thoughts and favorite moments from their adventure? Share your opinions in the comments below, and let's discuss how simple gestures can spark the most astounding transformations.